Everybody, and welcome to another edition of Phillies Daily on the Fan Arc Podcast Network. I am your host, Chris Moore, and the Phillies dropped 2 out of 3 in Los Angeles against the Dodgers. A disappointing weekend, to say the least. Offense was lifeless. Don't get the start we were hoping for out of Zach Wheeler on Friday night. Andrew Painter, which I said, I felt like was maybe the second most important thing out of this series. Obviously, number one was winning. But I felt like number two was getting a good start from Andrew Painter, because I felt like that was something that he could really, really build off of, given that, they mentioned it on the Phillies broadcast. His last 3 starts before this one against Los Angeles, Painter came in with a 2.6 ERA in his last 3 starts. So you really felt like maybe he was starting to build, and now you have to wonder where the confidence is. 3 1/3, unable to get through the fourth inning. Dodgers knock him out early and win on Sunday with relative ease. Friday's game, Zach Wheeler, I mentioned it, gives up 4 solo shots. As great as Zach Wheeler is, the Dodgers just have some guys in the lineup that hit him well, most notably Freddie Freeman, who was the first on the board to hit one of those solo shots, and the rest of the Dodgers lineup kind of carried it from there. Phillies offense, lifeless. We'll get into the offense. Lifeless by and large in game one. Scratched across a couple late, but too little, too late. They lose 4-2 in game one. Game two, the lone win in this series off of Edmundo Sosa's go-ahead home run late in that one. And even that looked for a long time like they were going to lose. Mattingly brought Sosa in, I believe it was the 6th inning to hit for Brandon Marsh, which a lot of people question, and Sosa struck out. But obviously came up big later in the game to get them their lone win in this series. That was a 4-3 win. But again, one swing of the bat, it could have easily been a 3-1 loss. But, you could look at that the other way. If they don't hit, maybe Marsh gets that hit in the 6th inning. So that's kind of one that could go either way. But just something to point out how close this was to a weekend sweep in Los Angeles, because obviously yesterday's debacle, again, offense completely lifeless, a 9-1 drought on a Sunday afternoon in Los Angeles. Listen, losing 2 out of 3 to the Dodgers is nothing to go crazy about. I know it's Philadelphia. People are going to be really upset. And understandably so, because we felt like we had started to see signs of life, that this team was forming into the team that we believed could compete with the Dodgers. They're not there yet. Offensively, the offense is not going at a pace right now that, you feel like they can really, you can't trust them to beat anybody confidently. There are teams that they should beat, but you can't confidently believe that they can win a series or beat almost anybody in baseball right now, because offensively, it is a real struggle. It is a real grind. We're pretty much hoping that every time Schwarber comes up, there's runners on and he can hit one out of the park. But now that he's batting leadoff, we know at least one of his at-bats is going to come with nobody on base. So yeah, and even Harper, it's kind of hit or miss with him. You're just hoping that he has one of those really good days, and hopefully it's on the same day that Schwarber has a good day, and the two of them can carry them through. But right now, offensively, it is just non-existent. And so, yeah, losing 2 out of 3 to the Dodgers shouldn't be incredibly surprising. I've talked a lot about these 4 series. Were very important. And you do the math, and they are 5-4 in these 9 games so far. Lost 2 out of 3 to Cleveland, lost 2 out of 3 to the Dodgers, but they swept the Padres, and they'll get the Padres again starting tomorrow. We will get into the Padres series tomorrow. Not too much to talk about there, but just, really want to kind of go over this weekend and the offense. Again, lifeless for 3 games, and you all know it, and this isn't the first time that this has happened. And you have to factor in the opponent. The Dodgers are a very good team, very good starting pitching. They're good everywhere, right? And so, but it just feels like the offense is basically looking at the starting pitching and saying, hey, we need you to go 6, 7 shutout innings, and then maybe we'll eventually scratch one across. That's the best we got for you, and it puts pressure on a Zach Wheeler and on Jesus Luzardo, and especially on your young rookie and Andrew Painter. Got through the first, but it was on from there. The Dodgers kind of kept scratching and clawing and kept putting them together and better at bats. They were working Painter's pitch count, which in these previous three starts that he's thrown the ball well in, he's actually really controlled his pitch count very well, and the Dodgers didn't let him do that. And so they fell behind, and at this point, you feel like they're down 2-0, and it's over because the offense just is nowhere to be found. Again, unless Bryce Harper and Kyle Schwarber are having a really good day, or a Turner or a Real Muto or Alec Boehm or Bryce Stott run into one. There's just you're just kind of hoping at this point, and I get it's tough because on one hand we all want to say, well, they're all hitting 200. Everybody hits 200 nowadays. It's all about this. Get guys that have good batting average, get on base, and I feel the same way. But it's just not the way the game is looked at anymore. It's not the way the teams build, construct their teams, construct their lineups. And it's also not the way the game is taught in the minor leagues. They're not teaching guys to slap hit and get on base and move runners over and things like that. They're just everybody's swinging for the fence. And so, I don't know. I don't know what you do. Guys that hit 330 anymore are just, almost non-existent. Obviously, we have Brandon Marsh, and I've said, and I would like to see at least against right-handers, you put him in the leadoff spot. But I understand the hesitation with that because then you're lefty, 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 Marsh, Schwarber, Harper. Real Muto's not going good enough right now that you'd say, okay, well, we'll bat him third to break this up a little bit. He's not going good enough right now. So your, opponents would just bring in a lefty out of the bullpen as soon as they need to. And, you're lined up, your three best hitters, and they've got a matchup. They can get those guys out. And then the next six are pretty much free outs from this lineup right now. So, I don't know what the fix is. I don't think there's any fix other than the players have to play better. I talked about how these CBA talks may affect the trade deadline, and I think it depending on how talks move in the next 2 months, big moves for big players may be scarce because teams aren't going to want to give up a ton when there's the possibility of no season next year. But also teams aren't going to want to take a discount because they still feel like they have a really good player who's worth something. So I don't know that there's a major answer at the trade deadline. I mentioned Mickey Moniak a couple shows ago from Colorado, bring him back maybe. But again, if he keeps hitting the way that he is, I don't know. I don't know what the package looks like. I don't know that teams are going to come to, a ton of agreements because of next year being such a big question mark. So that's what I said. There's nobody in the minors that you look at that and feel like we can call them up and they can provide a spark, and nobody on the big league roster right now that you feel like is going to really progress. I don't feel like. I mean, maybe JT Real Muto, maybe Trey Turner. But Bowman Stott, I mean, this is kind of who they've been now for a few years. They'll get hot, they'll go good for a little while, and then they kind of taper off and regress back to the mean. So I don't know, right? We came into these 3 games against the Dodgers, excited, and I don't want to overreact. But at the same time, even when you start to look at some of these wins, it's been all starting pitching and the offense scratching a handful across, right? And you have your handful of games where everybody goes good and, the other team kind of mails it in and you do score a bunch of runs. But, by and large, they're winning in the margins by 1-2 runs. And how sustainable is that? I don't know. Offense is down across the board, so maybe that's something to do with it and a little bit encouraging. But, I don't know. Just hard to get good feelings right now when the offense is struggling so much and the team is admitting it. And then, you get a weekend like this where the starters, aren't perfect. Your ace and Christopher Sanchez is off this weekend, and your second ace and Zach Wheeler struggles. 4 solo shots, which again, when you look at a lineup, with Harper and Schwarber and Real Muto and Turner and Boehm, and you'd like to think that they could keep up with 4 runs, but they just can't right now. So they lose with Zach Wheeler's start. I mentioned Andrew Painter, 3 1/3. Just again, I think you have to give credit. The Dodgers worked him and drove his pitch count up, saw a lot of pitches, and by the time they got to the second time through the order, they had a pretty good feel for what they were going to see. And Painter didn't have his best stuff. That happens, and unfortunately, when you don't have your best stuff, some teams you can work around it and still have a good outing. And Painter's not in a position right now where he can not have his best stuff and still have a good outing against a team like the Dodgers. One of the lesser teams struggle offensively, not as good of a lineup. Maybe Painter would still have a shot to keep him in the game, but not against this Dodgers lineup. Uh, Jesus Luzardo threw the ball well. He continues to trend in a positive direction. I think that and the bullpen in game two were probably the two biggest takeaways that are happy with. The bullpen 1,000% kept him in it. Luzardo got through 5+, and then Alvarado, Kirkering, Keller, and Duran, of course, only give up one run in the pretty much the second half of that game. Kept him in it, and obviously Edmundo Sosa gets the big home run to put him ahead. So that the one positive I feel like you could take away from this one, the good signs that Jesus Luzardo, not a fluke right now, continuing to progress and be the guy I think the Phillies expected him to be when they signed him to the contract. And then the bullpen, really your big guys that you would rely on in a postseason. You brought all four of them in against maybe the best lineup in baseball, and they kept you in the game until the offense, was able to get it done. And that's right. Again, that's what I continue to say. Like the starters have to throw the ball really, really well. The bullpen has to be good. You keep them in the game, and the offense is good enough. You feel like at some point they're going to run into something as long as they're still in the game. And that game one with and Zach Wheeler's start when it was 4-0, felt like it was just on the perimeter of having a chance, and they just couldn't get any of those big hits with guys on base to score more than one run at a time. And then yesterday's start from Painter, felt like they were done very early in that game, and were kind of checked out. Let's get the heck out of here, get back to Philadelphia. Which happens, right? It happens over the course of a 162 game season. You have days where it's all right. Let's get out of here. And obviously, Don Mattingly felt the same way. Pulled a bunch of guys late yesterday, especially after Trey Turner's kind of let some frustration show after an out. I believe that was the sixth or seventh inning. But yeah, it was just kind of felt like time for that. But yeah, on the starters, Wheeler, okay, probably okay is the best you'd say, given the standards that he has. I think if Andrew Painter gave us that start, we'd feel a little bit differently. But Wheeler gave it to us. It was okay. Again, I told you, Dodgers have some guys that have had success off of Zach Wheeler in the past, and they continued that on Friday. Luzardo threw the ball well, kept him in the game, gave him a chance. They rewarded him. And then Painter struggled. And so now we'll reset. I think his next goal will be against the White Sox. He'll miss the Padres series. Good news for us for this Padres series, the way it's worked out. Sanchez and Wheeler are both going to be on the mound. Zach Wheeler is going to be itching to get back out there and try and match and one up Christopher Sanchez and the way Sanchez is going. Nola will lead it off on Tuesday night. Again, we'll get into all this tomorrow, but just wanted to kind of give you some little bit of good news. We've got three guys that should feel good going into these starts against the Padres, and a chance that hopefully they can pick things back up. Some injury stuff. Good news on the JT Realmuto front. You saw if you missed it, he got hit by a pitch right on the hand, wrist. Had to come out of the game and was definitely concerning. Always a fear when you get hit by a pitch up in that area, but just a bruise. Obviously, day off today. Good news. Wouldn't be surprised to see him out of the lineup tomorrow, although I don't know. I didn't even look at the starter for the scheduled starter for the Padres tomorrow. Whether it's a lefty or a righty, I didn't even look. So that might depend. If it's a righty, hey, take the day off or be available off the bench. If it's a lefty and he's feeling good, you might want to you might put him in there. So, but we'll see on that. Aiden Miller, another one, prospect. the Phillies' number one prospect, not just any prospect. 2 weeks ago, I think it was a week or two ago, we were told that he was back to baseball activities, at least light baseball activities, starting to get back into it. Now we're told no baseball activities, just rehabbing the back injury. So don't know if that means there was a setback or somebody misspoke. Not sure. Kind of concerning to me, because if it was just somebody misspeaking or a misquote, I feel like it would have been corrected in the next day or two, not a week or two later. So, little concerning that there may have been a slight setback, but I guess they didn't shut him down. He's just back to rehabbing. So, that I guess, if you are going to re aggravate something, still being able to have activity and rehab it is good news. I don't know. There's not a ton that we know about it. Other than we were told one thing a week or two ago. Now we're told something different now. He's the one guy that you maybe would have hoped could make an appearance in the big leagues this season offensively that could help this team. But, right now it's such a question mark. It's not anything that you can count on. So we'll see. I guess see if we get more updates in the coming weeks on Aiden Miller. But Phillies dropped 2 out of 3 against the Dodgers. We will get back into it for a 3-game set at home against the San Diego Padres. We'll preview that and more tomorrow on Phillies Daily on the Fan Art Podcast Network. I am your host, Chris Moore. Have a good day, everybody.